Thank you so much for coming here on our show today to talk about VitalFlo, what's going on at the Velocity and Methodist Healthcare Ministries Accelerator. We're really excited to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So people in our community may not be familiar with VitalFlo. It's something that hopefully they'll get to know more and more about. But talk about VitalFlo, and then also with that, talk about your connection to San Antonio.
Yeah, so VitalFlo is a proactive respiratory health company, and so what that means is we basically make some of the measurements for diagnostics easier to do. The short version is there's a test called spirometry, which is it's kind of like you might get blood pressure test for to monitor your cardiovascular disease. Spirometry is the number one way that you would diagnose and monitor your asthma or COPD condition. So chronic lung disease. And we make that test a lot easier to do for primary care doctors. Right now, it's kind of regulated into the pulmonary labs, and that makes it so it's harder to access. There's a lot of folks that don't live close by to a pulmonologist if they're not in a big city center. And so we make that easier to do in the communities where folks are actually getting to see their doctor. And for San Antonio connection, our company actually went through Techstars in Austin, so Central Texas. But our lead investor, Geekdom Fund, is based in San Antonio. It's one of the bigger VC funds locally, and so that allowed us to connect with Velocity and with Methodist Ministries to check out this pilot and this Catalyst program that we are working on and to get involved in the community.
Well, that's great. And talk about, this technology and this accessibility for, conditions that, people have to, live with, but can go from, one day everything's fine to the next day there's tragedies on there. What kind of traction has VitalFlo had throughout the United States?
Yeah, so we're in 27 states now, about 77 clinics across the country. We started in smaller clinics, so independent mom and pop shops. They're a little bit of a dying breed right now in healthcare. But it was a great way to get more hands on the product, make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do to help those providers, administer this test to their asthma and COPD patients. And we've been moving into larger group practices, some that specialize in allergies, asthma, ENT, and then into health systems. And that's kind of what that enterprise shift is, what has made working with Methodist Ministries and their connection to the broader community, a lot of different clinics, has made that feasible for us. And it's important because the conditions, asthma and COPD, probably everyone's met somebody who has an inhaler to help keep these conditions in check. But there's nothing more fundamental than your ability to breathe. And so if you're having an asthma attack or a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is COPD, if you're having an episode, what that means is you can't breathe. And that means you need to rush to the ER. With these conditions, there's about 3.2 million trips to the ER every year just because of asthma and COPD. And there's about 10 or 11 million different individual episodes. That's 10 or 11 million people every year in the US that can't breathe for a little while and that needs to be addressed. And that can be fixed a lot more proactively if we can move some of the monitoring technologies and testing technologies into their primary care provider. There's, I think, 5.5 million folks in the US that live over an hour from their closest pulmonologist. So bringing access to specialty groups and just bringing access into their primary care office helps quite a bit with that.
So you talked a lot about the diagnostic and, the accessibility of diagnostic equipment given the, distance and maybe even capabilities of some of the offices that are even within distance, to be able to do that. But talk a little bit more about the monitoring aspect of your of VitalFlo, because that again moves from not just the diagnostic, as I understand it, to be more proactive in that care. So that way there aren't so many episodes that require some sort of acute intervention for that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so it all starts with making sure that we have things diagnosed in the first place. So that's kind of step one, which is why I've been harping on getting this test into primary care clinics. But following that, there's a couple different pieces. Why hasn't this been in primary care before? And it's because the docs aren't comfortable either doing the test or interpreting the test. So we help with both of those. We can also remote in pulmonologists, respiratory therapists, pulmonary experts to help with the interpretation part of the test. So if they do the test in the primary care clinic, we can have a remote respiratory therapist read that test and help with interpretation so the doc can send folks home with their care. We've also developed partnerships to do ongoing monitoring, which is everything from pharmacy fulfillment services, custom medications for nebulizer treatments. So this is kind of a fancier version of an inhaler to make sure that the care is being managed proactively. Different tools and devices that can manage care and see how patients are doing from the comfort of their own home. And that involves both spirometry, which we've made so much easier to use that we can do that in the home, and then other tools and devices like pulse oximeters and that kind of thing, where we can just get a picture of how this patient's doing, see, are you taking the medications at the rate that you're supposed to be? If not, why not? Can we help you with refilling those prescriptions and things like that? So we're starting to introduce those home monitoring packages for this wraparound care. And like you said, that's kind of the key to reducing those those trips to the ER or those hospitalizations is, how do we do this on a day-to-day basis, help patients and their providers manage their care in partnership?
So from a testing standpoint, well, let me move into this. Congratulations again. I don't think I've said it here on there, but I want to make sure I do, with being accepted into the cohort for the Methodist Healthcare Ministries and Velocity Community Accelerator. Again, you've got connections here to San Antonio people don't realize, and again, this technology is something that is addressing a real need in our community and communities across the country. Um, what do you believe is the gap that is out there with regard to proper diagnostic? Is it really accessibility? Is it maybe awareness? Is there a combination of that? Why do you think we have a diagnosis and testing gap here?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So there's about 2/3 of folks that have actually been diagnosed with asthma and COPD, got that diagnosis without ever doing spirometry, which is not up to guideline. So that means
Wow.
that folks are doing it based on essentially, some symptom
Listening to the
reporting
lungs or
and
something. Wow.
yeah, and then prescribing something just based on hey, they're wheezy and they've smoked cigarettes before, so therefore it must be COPD. Uh,
Wow.
and that's not the most accurate way to do things. And it means that you don't necessarily get folks on the correct medication or the correct dosage of that medication to be effective.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and when you have folks on the wrong medication, they tend to not use it as well because it's
Right.
causing other issues and side effects and things like that. So getting to the right diagnosis is really important. But primary care providers traditionally have been uh, basically taught by the system that everything to do with pulmonary diagnostics is a referral. So, hey, we think you might have this, but let's send you to the pulmonologist to double check. Spirometry is a simple test, but that's not the perception. And we've made it a lot easier to use through our coaching and our software. And that's why we've been focusing on moving this into the primary care clinic. And also why I think it's a great opportunity to partner with Methodist Ministries, because they have a lot of funded clinics in rural Texas, rural South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, Corpus, and throughout South Texas that have folks that live 1, 2, 3 hours away from their closest pulmonologist. If you say, hey, we think you might have asthma or we think you might have COPD, and let's send you to the pulmonologist to check, and that parent of that child or that 72-year-old patient who might have COPD has to get in the car and drive for 3 hours to get to their pulmonologist to get that confirmed. That's not a realistic option for a lot of folks, especially if it's a poor sociodemographic region. So bring that local is a huge benefit. And then there's ways to use that local diagnostic and that data set that we'll be able to build through a program like this to then recruit maybe some folks. Maybe we can bring the pulmonologist to the team in the long term. And rather than trying to send folks the other way, which typically doesn't have, you end up with a lot of folks with canceled appointments and things like that.
Sure,
It's
sure,
that big of
sure.
an issue.
What was one of the reasons, or can you help tell our viewers one of the reasons you came to the Methodist Healthcare Ministries and Velocity Accelerator? Because I mean, these things aren't just, people don't realize. I mean, these are time intensive. There's work that's done. There's a lot that's done. What were some of your reasons for joining and applying for the Accelerator?
Yeah, well, one of the big transitions that we're in the middle of, and we've been growing as a company, is shifting to larger clients. So moving from the small clinics that we started with into hospital and health systems. And Ministries is obviously a partner with Methodist healthcare system. But they also directly fund hundreds of clinics across South Texas. So we have a real opportunity to expand our footprint. And we've seen a lot of success with our existing program in rural communities and places that are a little off the beaten path, either exurb or rural. And so we think we're a great fit in that regard. But just as for some added context, there's about 118 clinics that are funded clinics, either federally qualified health centers, which is a special designation, which means they get some money from the feds. But a lot of these clinics are effectively, charity healthcare, and Ministries has taken it as their mission to make sure that they can deliver that healthcare. And we're very excited to be part of that and see if we can't add a new capability to these clinics and help them serve their patients. I mean, one of the interesting demographic pieces of the Rio Grande Valley is they have rates of COPD that are about 37% higher than the rest of Texas. And, some of that is going to be, based on demographics and things like this. But I don't think there's enough care for those patients given those rates. And it's because of these barriers that we've been talking about. So we're excited to be able to partner to hopefully knock down a few of those.
So what would it mean for VitalFlo to be selected? I mean, we've got pitch competitions coming up. The winner of the pitch competition will get the opportunity to pilot their innovation with Methodist Healthcare Ministries. What would that mean for VitalFlo in your commercialization and kind of in y'all's journey?
Yeah, well, I think it'd be hugely impactful. So as I mentioned, I think a little bit before, we're in about 77 or so clinics across the country right now. But the footprint that we are presenting, and we're actually calling our program a catalyst program because we're ready to scale kind of throughout the region. And since we're in the clinic, we can partner directly with the providers. It's a system that we've done before 77 times to get folks up and running relatively quickly. But there's 118 clinics that we're looking at doing, and we might not get to all of them in a 6-month period, but we might double our footprint of VitalFlo's footprint. So that's huge for us to be able to take, hey, we have some evidence that we can scale, and we can scale quickly with other enterprise partners. So the opportunity to work with Ministries on this is huge for our commercialization path, and we'll have a nice proof point for us. And importantly, we're also going to be able to help communities in need that we think would really benefit from the solution.
Which is what the community accelerator is all about, is taking innovations, deploying those, helping companies like VitalFlo and your other cohort members, so that way you can accelerate your growth by demonstrating scalability or the things you need to demonstrate to potential investors and other customers. And then most importantly, is you're impacting the community by, getting people access to care or improved quality of life for things that, again, I think you said 37% greater instance of these within the Rio Grande Valley. And, so you're basically going opposite, right? The supply and the incident of it is increasing, and the supply of providers is decreased, and,
Yep.
is not sustainable, to create a real health equity gap within the Rio Grande Valley of there. Let me ask you, I mean, you are a seasoned startup founder. You guys have got some great traction, talked about all that today. Some of the wisdom that you probably have and can share with our listeners here. What would be one of what is one of those lessons that was a really big surprise for you down this journey that maybe you wouldn't have thought of when you first set out?
That's a great question. I think even if you've heard it before, you can still fall into. So I'm a first-time founder. So we now have a few years into this. So to your point, a little bit more seasoned now, but started this pretty green. And you hear the saying about first-time founders are a lot more focused on the product, and second-time founders are a lot more focused on the distribution. I would say that is definitely was true in my case, and I've changed my relative priorities as we've grown there. And healthcare in particular is interesting on that front because there's so many partnerships and there's so many regulatory barriers to entry and things like that. So learning the distribution channels and finding quick ways to maybe what are the proof points so I can move up the stack. That was something we kind of fell into. So we worked with those small clinics in part because they were the ones that would say yes faster.
Right.
So finding, what navigating and trying to find what's the toehold to get proof points to go to the larger customers with. And a lot of that, I think, is just engaging with them earlier. So even when you don't think you can serve them with your product as it stands right now today, you should still be in conversation with them and learning, hey, what's the proof point you need to see if you're going to launch with us at that enterprise level? And then, letting just like, they're almost like an investor in the sense of they want to see what's your progress and, have you been able to do the proof points that we suggested in order to roll out at a larger scale. So I think the advice would be, go talk to your endpoint customers who are not necessarily the same as your first customers. Talk to them at the beginning and learn what you need to do to convince them to invest in you by adopting your solution.
No, I mean, it's a great, I mean, there's been a lot of conversations we've had on our show about product market fit. And most first time startup founders I talk to, they tell me all about the product, all about the product, all about the product. But I'm like, is there a market? What does it fit? What does it look like? But you bring up an excellent point, which it's not just product. Is there a market? It's your ideal market. Will it fit? And you don't have to be there today, but if you're getting that feedback on your roadmap, you can be entering the market and moving while you get to your ultimate place that you need to be, which is the true market you want to get into. It's scalability and those functions, which is great advice. Talk a little bit about, I mean, people know I have healthcare background. I do a lot of, healthcare legal and operational myself, but talk about the challenges you faced with regard to healthcare from the barriers, regulatory size, and then, health tech, especially with, privacy concerns and those things. What have you learned in maybe some, from those challenges that, founders have to address in this industry?
Yeah, well, where to start? So there's a lot of different challenges. I'd say one thing is, there might be a particular way you would prefer to sell your solution, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how your customer is set up to buy it. And so when you're thinking about product market fit and some of these other pieces, it might be, hey, the best way to monetize my solution would be, a per seat SaaS model, the same way that all the tech companies work. It's like, well, is that how they're actually set up to purchase your solution, or do they tend to buy it in, as a CapEx as opposed to an OpEx? How do they do fulfillment? Are they going to put their credit card information into your auto subscription form online, or are they going to expect you to issue a PO every month for that subscription? And if you're doing that, is that worth your time? So figuring out how to package these things in a way that they can buy it is learning curve. And it's also because they have a particular model that they're trying to do. Healthcare is interesting because they're transitioning models right now. So you see the adoption of Medicare and Medicaid Advantage plans, which is this shift to more holistic wraparound care in terms of how things are paid for. It's called value-based care. That's new. The old way to do things and the traditional way to do things, and still the most popular way to do things, is fee for service. So the question is, does your solution, can they charge for it? And that is a question that's answered by the CPT codes. And, does Medicare pay for it? Does Medicaid pay for it? Do the private insurers pay for it? Do the employers pay for it instead as a way to offset their insurance costs, but they're not actually paying it with the CPT codes? There's a lot of different models to carve out, and all depends on who your target is. And the challenge is you kind of have to poke around to find what your best fit model might be with that endpoint customer. And that might change who your customer is, which might change what your product needs to be, which again is why having these conversations early and often with those endpoint customers is key, because it's very complicated. only getting more complicated, and it changes every single year. So,
That's right. That's right.
all the
And,
contracts, all the CMS regulations, all the ways that they do CPT codes, the amount that they pay on the CPT codes, all that changes every single year. So you got to, steep learning curve, and then it stays a steep learning curve, and you got to keep up too.
yeah, I mean, people, they say, market, right? Well, the healthcare market for this is, billions and trillions of dollars. And I mean, the reality is for those that can break in and get, a high rate of adoption, by providers, whether that's physicians, hospitals, whatever that is. It is a very massive market. What people don't realize is to get the kind of adoption in order to tap into that market, it's drug device. Ask drug manufacturers how much they spend in development and marketing and all sorts of stuff to try to get in there, and how many of those products don't make it through. I mean, it is an extremely challenging environment. I wanted to ask you a little bit. You mentioned Geekdom Fund earlier on here. From a fundraising standpoint and going through those rounds, what are some of the lessons that you've learned as a first-time founder regarding fundraising?
Well, I guess this is a little relevant since we have some presentations associated with the Accelerator and that kind of thing. So if you're a first time founder and you've been doing the pitch competition route and all that, that's great. We actually brought in, a fair amount of, winnings from that. And in a lot of cases, it was non-dilutive funding. So it wasn't investment. It was just cash. Cash is always great. So doing some of that can be helpful. But that is not fundraising. So it's important, if you're a first-time founder, to not confuse a pitch competition with a conversation with investors. It's a very different ballgame.
Yeah.
And the presentation, the deck, the things you're going to talk about is a lot different. For a competition, you're trying to whiz bang the audience and kind of make it flashy and say, hey, this is a cool solution, but you're not necessarily going to dive into your financial statements. Investors are going to be very curious about what is the existing cap table, what's your revenue model, what's the proof of the revenue model is actually going to work. So all these things I was talking about with the CPT codes, if you have a theory about we're going to be able to, our customers are going to make money because they're reimbursing on these codes. It's like, okay, well, what's your proof that that's actually going to work? So validating the business model, saying what you're going to use their money for. So is there a reason why you're raising a particular amount of money? Is it just because you want to get that press release out, or is it because you actually have a viable use of funds there? So there's a lot of different conversations that have to do with if they're giving you money, it's not just so you can go have fun and run your company. It's because they want 3, 10, 100x back. So what is your evidence that you can turn if they're an angel investor, $25,000 check. If they're a VC fund, their $500,000, million, $5 million check into 10, 100x that, and on what time frame. So what's your evidence that you can move fast? If it's a venture business, it's a little different. If it's angels and longer term capital, family office, that kind of thing. If it's VC business, they have investors too that they're returning money to in 10 years. So understanding the model of the investor that you're talking to. If it's a family office, they might just want to see your solution in the world, and they'll give you 10, 15 years to build it. If it's a VC fund, they have to return cash to their LPs in probably less than 10 years, because you're probably not talking to them on day one of the fund. If they're in year 3 of the fund and you're kind of the last new check, you have 7 years to return that investment to them. So you got to be on a steeper trajectory if you're later in their fund cycle. So understanding their business model is key to knowing how to present your business model.
Yeah, I mean, people, the pitch competitions in their purest form, right? They're little dog and pony, bold innovations that are well thought out, put together, and can inspire the judges, right? Those are the ones that will win. Your judges vary based upon what type of contest it is. But then when it comes to pitching it, you've got to have that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where deep dives come in. A pitch gets you a hook into a potential fish, but you'll never reel that fish in if once they get behind the slide deck and realize there's not product market fit, there's not the right team that's there, the strategy isn't necessarily what it needs to be, and those sort of things, which makes it exciting for the Methodist Velocity Community Accelerator, because there's two portions to this.
Yep.
You've got the traditional pitch, and then you've also got what is a pilot pitch that doesn't actually happen in the public setting. It happens in the private setting. What are your thoughts on that model?
I really like that model because 5 minutes is not enough time to explain why this is going to work and be impactful for the 118 clinics that we're pitching, that we can help through this model. That takes a little bit more time and space. So the ability to present that over, present it for about 10 minutes, but also have 15, 20 minutes of Q&A to really dive deep and see the validity. And then understanding that there's going to be, time afterward to hammer out some additional details. But, if you're thinking about these as longer term programs to make a big impact, Methodist Ministries wants these to actually work and actually improve the community. This isn't just a marketing exercise. This is, can we increase the capacity of our partners in the region through some of these programs? So that takes a little bit more of a deep dive and a viability analysis. And again, it's a little bit like actually pitching the investor, except that they're the customer. Of what's the money for? What's it going to do? What am I going to get back from it? What's the community going to get back from it? How sustainable is the program going to be after this initial batch of money? That's one thing that we've been really focused on is using our program. Basically, one of our pitches with this initial investment from Methodist Ministries, we will be able to get these clinics up and running. And then because of some of the ways that they can reimburse for the services, we expect that they would be able to run this at least even, if not profitably in the long term, which would make it a very sustainable program that Methodist Ministries doesn't have to continually put more and more and more money into to keep it going. It can be self-sustaining after the initial launch. So that's one of the things we've been really focused on. But that's all. We're talking, and we've been chatting for 20 plus minutes, coming up on a half hour, and we're unpacking all of this.
Sure.
A 5-minute kind of whiz bang pitch isn't enough to do that. So that's why
that's exactly,
I think really helpful to do that longer form thing with the constituencies involved at Methodist Ministries, and really hashing out some of the financials and why we expect we can pull off what we're pitching.
Well, Luke, again, congratulations on the selection of being in the cohort for the inaugural Methodist Healthcare Ministries and Velocity Community Accelerator. And I wish you the best of luck next week as you go in to pitch in both of those pitches, to have your innovation potentially be out in our community to make the kind of impact that you've been talking about today. Thanks so much for coming on, and good luck.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you for your part in getting the program started with Jamie. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So for those of you that are watching, I mean, again, these are connections to our community that you probably didn't know about. And we're always excited to get to share to you these exciting connections and companies that are doing innovative things here. And we just, if you have any sort of comments, please leave that into the comments. What would be great is you could hit that like button on whatever platform you're watching us on or listening to us to. And we'll be back again for the next member of the cohort here, as we share with you all these exciting innovations that are here in our community with the potential to be deployed. We'll see you real soon.